We are going to be watching the Valllow Daybell trial. We currently are going to see today's video, and it's a pretty long one. So we're going to skip through, get right to the point of it all. And if you need anything audio-wise adjusted, please let me know. I finally got that fixed within my program. So I'm going to go ahead and start.
We'll bring the jury in. Okay. Name that he most recently had a recent relationship falling out with.
So who tried to contact her and when was that? I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It was during the interview in the car before I can return back to the crime scene. Brandon and I discussed what we had. I gathered that information. We knew that one of his children was with his soon-to-be ex-wife, and we knew where the other three children were. We, at this point, did not know the full circumstances surrounding the shooting. So it was important to reach out to her, let her, Melanie, know, hey, there was a shooting that just occurred, and speak with her.
So who ended up calling her? You called her or Brandon called her?
Brandon called her from his phone 3 separate times.
And she didn't answer?
No.
But you didn't attempt to call her directly?
Not during that time, no.
Okay. And so as far as you know, Brandon followed that admonition to not contact her again that day?
Yes, as we also had his phone, so
Oh, that's right.
that made it so he couldn't.
Okay. And
That
so,
wasn't the purpose, but we had his phone.
so did you end up making contact with Melanie?
I made contact telephonically with Melanie Boudreau at the time, now Pulowski, and yes, I was able to make contact with her.
Was that still on October 2nd or is that the next day?
I left a message for her. I don't remember when I spoke with her specifically, but she agreed to meet with me on October 3rd, which was the following day after the shooting.
And that was at the Gilbert Police Department?
Gilbert Police Department in a private interview room, yes.
Okay. And so Melanie came and met you that day on October 3rd, is that correct?
Yes.
And you interviewed her?
Yes.
And she came in voluntarily
Yes.
and talked to you?
Yes.
And did she ask for an attorney?
No.
And about how long was that interview, do you think?
Approximately 1 hour. It was a little interrupted because their youngest was with them in the room. She didn't have childcare at that time, but I believe the interview lasted for about an hour.
Okay. And did she advise you in that interview of some business deals that Brandon was involved in?
Again to
The
hearsay.
objection sustained, it's hearsay.
Did you investigate anything that you learned during that interview?
Yes.
Did you investigate anything that Melanie offered to you during that interview?
Can you be more specific about what was offered?
Yeah, sure.
If you're going to offer a hearsay statement, maybe have him review something that you want him to consider, if you have a written copy.
Okay. Maybe a better question is, did you follow up with anything that you learned during that interview with Melanie?
Yes.
And did you talk to her again after that 1 hour-long interview?
I did speak with her again, yes.
On the phone or in person?
The next time I had any communication with Melanie was on October 14th, so a few days after our in-person interview.
Okay, and did she contact you?
She did contact me.
And she was coming to you for help?
She was reaching out regarding some custodial issues.
She thought you might be able to help her, is that correct?
She was seeking some advice, yes.
So Brandon had testified that he provided you with a VIN number to a Jeep Wrangler in my household on October 2nd, 2019. Is that correct?
That is correct that he testified to that, yes.
And did he do that? Did he provide you with that VIN number?
I do not remember that. I do not recall being provided a VIN number. There was a lot that happened early in the investigation. I can tell you that we got the license plate for the Texas Jeep early on in our investigation, which when running a license plate, we also received the VIN number, but I do not remember specifically getting the VIN number from Mr. Boudreau.
So where did you get the license plate number from?
From the Chandler photographs from their incident in
So
July.
after, like yesterday, you contacted Chandler and that's where you got those from?
The images with the license plate, yes.
And what day was that you contacted Chandler in October?
When I contacted them, I can't testify to that, but I do know that I physically met with them on October 9th of 2019.
Okay. So your testimony here today is that you did not discover that the Jeep was gray in my household because of the VIN number that Brandon provided to you. Would that be fair?
Yes, that would be fair.
But you did discover it on October 9th that there was a gray Jeep in my household. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Okay. Would it also be fair to say that no one that you interviewed or talked to mentioned anything about the Jeep being gray?
The color of it being gray, no.
Okay.
Not early in the investigation.
Did you search for a green Jeep with Texas plates on it?
No. No, there was never a green Jeep specifically searched for with a Texas license plate. That would be something we would farm out to our investigators, our civilian investigators, and to specifically ask for a green Jeep Wrangler with a Texas license plate. I don't know what that would yield as far as results, and we didn't have enough to go after just that at that moment.
Okay. And you didn't farm that out, though. Is that correct?
At that juncture, no.
And did you search for a dark blue Jeep with Texas plates on it with a tire on the back?
Same answer, or similar answer to what I just provided.
Detective Pillar, how often or how many times would you say that you have communicated with Brandon Boudreau in the past 5.5 years?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to Aston answered as well as potential 404B issues?
I think she asked Mr. Boudreau those
Okay.
questions. I'll allow it, but be aware of the issues, please, that you could be opening. Go ahead.
Multiple times. I have spoken with Mr. Boudreau multiple times.
And would you say multiple emails back and forth?
The majority of communication was either telephonic or text message. However, I do know there were emails exchanged as well.
I'm going to hand you what is proposed exhibit 192 from the defense. Detective Pillar, do you recognize this email?
It appears to be an email that would be exchanged from Mr. Boudreau to myself within my police department email.
And that's something to and from him to you and to you from him?
In this example you provided, yes. I don't know how long the message thread was for this.
Okay. And you recognize that as a true and correct copy of that email exchange?
Yes, from February 12th of 2020.
The defense would move to publish the email?
State would object. We're going to go into
We
that.
we already discussed this exhibit. It's I'll sustain the objection. It's not being entered into evidence.
In that email, Detective, did you request that Brandon provide you with financial information regarding his ex-wife, Melanie Boudreau?
And Your Honor, I'm going to ask to sidebar again regarding defenses.
All right.
Detective Pillar, did you request that financial information regarding Melanie from Brandon?
Yes.
And did he provide you with that information?
Yes.
And did he provide you with financial documents you requested in another email?
I know we've discussed financial documents, and everything I was sent, I believe, was via email, but I don't know what specific one you may be referring to, but I think it's safe to say, yes, that there were emails exchanged about Melanie Boudreau Pulowski's financial records being sent to me.
Right. So her financial gain if something were to happen to Brandon. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So he also provided you with screenshots of information regarding Melanie that didn't have to do with finances. Is that also correct?
Your Honor, I'm going to object again and warn on 404A and 405.
Sustained.
Did you read those documents when they were sent to you?
I reviewed the documents that were sent to me, yes.
And did you include those in part of your investigation?
They are included in an investigation, yes.
So on those screenshots, does Melanie give a theory of what she thinks happened on October 2nd, 2019 that you reviewed?
Not that I remember from that exchange. I'd have to see it.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to hearsay and relevance.
I'm not asking for the truth of the matter. I just want to know what
Hold
he
on.
knows.
I didn't ask for argument. You can show him the document and then rephrase your question.
Okay.
Is there something specific you would like?
Go ahead and rephrase your question.
Is this one of the screenshots that Brandon sent to you? That you reviewed?
It doesn't have any email headings or footers on it. This is what appears to be a Word document, like from Microsoft Word. I can't testify that this is exactly what he sent me, if this is a attachment to the email, from what I'm looking at here.
Okay. Do you recognize it as something that you've read before? The information?
I'm not reading the whole thing. I'm simply
Sure.
reviewing what I can to
Sure.
see if
Take
it's
your time.
judging. I must say that I don't remember this. There was a lot of correspondence shared and a lot of images. But looking at this, this seems familiar with some of the allegations that I've heard throughout the investigation. However, I don't remember this specific document being sent to me.
So when you requested Brandon Boudreau on this date to send you these documents, that is part of the 7 screenshots that he sent to you.
Okay.
So my question is, during that time, you were still gathering information, right?
Yes.
You were still looking at all possibilities of what really happened on that day, right?
And I'm going to object to what time period. Are we talking about February? Is there a
Yeah,
date
can
on
you
there?
clarify the time period?
Foundation.
Is it the February
12th.
email? February
Yes.
12th. All right. So rephrase the question with that in it.
So my question is, did you ever read the information in that screenshot that you have there before?
It is possible. If it was sent to me in an email, I likely read it, yes. But there was at the point of February 12th of 2020, there were other investigations I was working on as well.
So did you disregard the information in that during your investigation?
I'm going to object, and I think we may need to
All
sidebar
right.
again.
Yeah, let's sidebar.
Tesla for a second. What happened with the Tesla window? I know it fell out of the car and was sitting on the driveway, so where did it go from there?
The Tesla, the glass from the window that fell out of the Tesla itself was discarded.
Was what?
Thrown away. It was discarded.
Oh, it was thrown away.
Yes.
And when did that happen?
I don't recall. I believe after we were concluding our time at the scene, we had our photographs of it, was turned over to the resident, in that case, Mr. Boudreau, to dispose of.
Okay. And it wasn't preserved for any reason?
No.
Why not?
We collected what we needed from it at that moment, and the amount of glass that was there and the images that were taken seemed sufficient at the time, and so it was simply thrown away.
Was there a hole in that window at all? Like a bullet hole?
A bullet hole through the window outside of the images that have been presented that would indicate where an impact point may have been, so kind of the curvature towards the top of the glass. Outside of that, no, there was no other damage that would match about a bullet hole.
Okay. And you didn't carefully put on 2 pairs of gloves and take it to the evidence room at the Gilbert Police Department, is that correct?
Take the glass?
Correct.
That's correct.
And what about the Tesla? So what happened to the Tesla that day?
After we processed the Tesla at the scene, we transported it over to the Gilbert Police Department to further inspect indoors. Essentially, it was just one more act that we could take to better review what we had already investigated for the hours that we were outside.
And was it like towed? Do you tow it over?
No, it was, although unorthodox, it was transported by myself and followed by Detective McDermott to the Property and Evidence Building, where we had a technician standing by. Once arrival to the garage at that facility, we further looked into the hole, the bullet hole, and we weren't there very long. It was, again, another last review of the damage.
So you drove it over, is that correct?
That is correct.
And it was photographed?
Yes, we photographed the vehicle at the scene. Once at the police department, we have the surveillance cameras, but we didn't photograph it further once at the police department. We had no intention of impounding it at that time.
And it was measured?
No,
The bullet hole and things were measured? All that was done at the scene, but nothing was done at the Gilbert Police Department?
Yes,
And then it wasn't tested for the trajectory while at the Gilbert Police Department?
that's correct.
And it wasn't placed into evidence?
We did not impound the vehicle. The purpose for that was it was the victim's only vehicle at that time, similar to the cell phone the smartphone that we took temporary custody of. For convenience purposes, it was ultimately turned back over to the owner, in this case, Mr. Boudreau, both the vehicle and the smartphone.
Within a day?
Yes, approximately a day. It was a very brief period of time.
Okay. And having been a case agent hundreds of times, you must have known that if you were ever going to charge someone with this crime, then surely you would need this evidence so the defense could hire their own experts to do testing of the car and the window, right?
The crime of this caliber, and it's not uncommon for cases to develop into something more than what you initially believe, that's part of being human, part of being an investigator. We did not take the vehicle in this case. We did not have a decedent. In other words, we did not have a person who was injured or killed. We had property damage, and we were still very early in our investigation to determine what happened. So, no, we did not maintain custody of that vehicle.
So is it not in your protocol to preserve evidence?
It's in our protocol to preserve evidence.
But not in this case?
In this case, I made the decision not to maintain custody of that Tesla.
So without this evidence available, how would my experts be able to test for trajectory?
We couldn't test for trajectory with what we had. If it was here today, it's possible that you guys could test for trajectory with the advancements in technology. Again, not being somebody who is trained or certified in any type of trajectory training, I don't know how that process would even look, but we simply don't have the vehicle today as we're discussing this.
And you don't have an expert at Gilbert Police Department that's an expert in trajectory?
At that time, we did not.
Okay. And how would my ballistics expert be able to test the hole in the Tesla to determine, in fact, if it was a rifle or a handgun that was used? How would I do that now?
How would you go about?
How would I have an expert do that now?
You would hire somebody who would potentially be a specialist in this area and see if they had the ability to obtain evidence of trajectory. But how would you do that now outside of hiring somebody and doing that without the vehicle? I suppose you could not.
Is it possible to perform our own tests from pictures?
Tests? No.
And did you request any tests be performed on the Tesla itself?
Outside of trying to obtain the surveillance footage and do our best that we could with what we had for the bullet hole itself, no additional tests were made.
And no testing was done with the window either, is that correct?
You're referring to the glass that was?
Yes, the glass.
No other tests were done with the glass.
Okay. And how about the 4 pieces of the projectile that were found? Were any of those tested?
Tested for?
For what kind of bullet they came from or what kind of gun they came from?
Again, not being a munitions expert, but seeing what bullet fragments look like and what projectiles can turn into upon impact, those fragments could not determine any type of rifling, which is the marks that are made within a barrel when a weapon is shot. Because the bullet was not intact, and we had no casing, we had no gun to verify where it came from. We simply had some markings of some possible jacketing and the lead, which appeared consistent with a bullet that was fired and then, of course, was fragmented. We were satisfied that we had a individual get shot at by some firearm, be it rifle, handgun, but a firearm, eastbound to westbound, that collided and then ultimately ended up in Mr. Boudreau's body frame. But to send it off for further testing, no, we did not send it off for further testing based on any reason that we knew we would not be able to get any viable weapon to compare it to, or any type of rifling where that would match another firearm.
Well, would it make a big difference if it wasn't a rifle at all and what Mr. Boudreau saw was a rifle?
Can you rephrase that question?
So if you were to test it and someone to say this came from a handgun, this did not come from a rifle, that would make a big difference in the story that Mr. Boudreau told to you, though, right?
No.
It would not.
No.
So he did not see a handgun, but if it came from a handgun, that would be contradictory, would it not?
To his statement of believing it was a rifle?
Correct.
His belief in mere observation for those split seconds of a weapon firing at him, I can't say for certain if it would have been from a handgun or a rifle. If we had an intact projectile or a shell casing, we'd have an answer to that. What we have now are bullet fragments and a bullet hole, and evidence to indicate that this happened. This shooting at Mr. Boudreau did in fact occur.
But you didn't test it.
The fragments were not tested.
Now, Detective Pillar, how many neighbors confirmed that they heard a gunshot?
Hearing a loud bang or hearing a gunshot, approximately 4, 5?
4. Do you know who those were? Who those neighbors were?
Not off the top of my head, no. From my memory.
Was that in one of your reports, that 4 neighbors heard a gunshot?
In my report, I documented the detectives who made contact with neighbors that either heard something or had electronic surveillance on their house that, although did not capture footage of the incident, captured consistent noise of a loud bang, as well as a vehicle idling for an extended period of time near their residence, which is near where the Jeep would have been parked prior to Mr. Boudreau arriving and then upon his arrival. But it just captured audio with no, again, once again, no footage of the actual shooting.
But you say multiple neighbors. Is that what your understanding was? That multiple neighbors heard a loud noise?
Yes.
So Brandon heard a loud noise. You have the ring that was a loud noise, right? Who else?
I don't know off the top of my head.
Could it be that there was no one else, just those two?
There were other neighbors that acknowledged hearing a noise. That was a loud noise. That was not a normal noise.
Were those across the street neighbors, neighbors on the other side?
I would have to refer to the detectives who interviewed individuals who said they heard something. And those detectives notated the addresses in which they heard a noise. But when I say multiple, clearly, I mean more than one person heard.
So two is multiple in your book. Is that correct?
In this case, we have more than two that have testified. But there are others that made
More than two people have testified here that they heard a loud noise?
Yes.
And who would those be?
We have the neighbor with the Ring camera, and I forget her name. I apologize. And then we have Mr. Boudreau, who heard that. And then we had, those are the two that we had so far with the loud noise and the consistent evidence.
So you would consider that multiple people. Is that correct?
But there are others within the report that acknowledge hearing the noise, yes.
Not in any report that I read, in a report that you read?
Object to testifying and
Sustained.
asked and answered and argumentative.
That's the objection sustained.
In a sworn statement that you made, Detective, you put the other neighbors confirmed they observed a gray-colored hardtop two-door Jeep. What neighbors do you know of that said that there was a gray Jeep?
Where was that testimony?
So, in your affidavit on November 19th regarding the Jeep Wrangler, would you like to take a look?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, yes, I see where this is in the affidavit.
And earlier you had testified that no one had said the Jeep was gray at all, but in your sworn testimony there, you say that other neighbors confirmed that they observed a gray-colored, hardtop, two-door Jeep. What neighbors would those be?
And this is the probable cause statement from,
For the infotainment center?
yeah, for the infotainment center, but on what date?
November 19th? 2019?
November 19th, 2019? Okay, so I don't recall who specifically said that they saw the gray-colored hardtop two-door Jeep. It was, however, at this juncture that I do know that was the vehicle we were looking at from the photographs and from the LPR hits.
It was an alleged vehicle, but that was not the vehicle that the neighbors described to you. Is that correct?
I did not have any vehicles described to me by a neighbor specifically, no.
So you swore that in your statement to take out that infotainment center to that two-door gray hardtop Jeep, right? You're the police officer. You're asking for a warrant to do this because this is your probable cause. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're saying in that neighbors confirmed that they saw a gray-colored hardtop two-door Jeep, but that was not true.
Suppose the one word that I could exchange from anything is a dark-colored hardtop two-door Jeep. But at this point in my investigation, I had confirmed that it was a gray-colored two-door Jeep.
Thank you. Actually, you might want to hold on to that one. I'll wait. Thank you. There's something else in this affidavit that I'd like you to look at.
Last paragraph?
If I can know what page you're showing him.
2714.
Thank you.
It is this last paragraph, correct, Ms. Daybell?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
let me just review it real quick.
Just the first underlined.
The first
part
underline, okay.
Of that paragraph. Have you reviewed that, Detective?
The first underline I just did. Do you want me to check the second line as well?
I would then ask to know, I'm sorry, what section you're actually showing him that's underlined?
It's just the third paragraph.
Can you show? You,
Your Honor, we may want to sidebar again.
all right, can I see the exhibit?
Detective, in preparing to investigate this crime, would you say, is it fair to say that most of the information that you gleaned is from Brandon Boudreaux?
In this initial investigation, yes.
Okay. And you were in constant contact with him during that time, in the early days of this investigation?
In the early days and then throughout the progression of the investigation.
And you were on a first-name basis, is that correct?
Yes. Again, that's not uncommon for me to do in really all my investigations.
So most people don't call you Detective Pillar?
Not typically. It depends on how the length of the investigation and the type of investigation that it is, but especially with victims or witnesses, I try to keep it casual.
Now, when you were giving back the Tesla, the window was thrown away, is that correct?
The window was discarded.
And the Tesla was given back.
To Mr. Boudreau, yes.
Did he come pick it up, or was it driven back over there?
From what I recall, it was picked up by him at the property and evidence building.
And were there any further instructions with that? Like, now you can get it fixed, you can do anything you want with it? Like, how does that work?
Essentially, it was, yes, here's your vehicle returned. We'll be in contact regarding the investigation and my contact with the individuals you provided for follow-up.
Okay. And then that was the end of that contact with any of the evidence that was taken at the time?
On October 2nd, yes.
And the fragments of the projectile, those were taken in an evidence bag and put into evidence at Gilbert Police Department?
From the scene directly to the police department, yes. Or
Was
the
there-
property evidence building, yes.
Was there any other evidence taken to the property evidence building?
I believe there was a cigarette butt. I believe there was multiple photographs. Other physical evidence I do not recall us taking.
You don't recall what?
I don't recall taking other physical evidence from the scene off the top of.
So a cigarette butt?
I believe if a cigarette butt was, it was across the street, and a neighbor thought it was inconsistent with being near his house because he didn't smoke.
Okay. Was DNA taken off of the cigarette butt?
No, I believe we still have it retained in our property evidence building.
So if you would have taken the DNA off the cigarette butt, then you might have a person who was smoking it?
We would
At the
probably
scene?
have a DNA profile of somebody who's walking down the street smoking a cigarette, yes.
So you didn't really think it was connected to this incident
Not from-
necessarily?
No,
Okay. And why was it collected?
because it was within the crime scene tape at this time, and the detective who spoke with the neighbor who provided the information thought it should be collected.
And during the course of your investigation, you never discovered that Brandon Boudreau was a smoker, right?
No,
Or that Alex Cox was a smoker, right?
no.
Did you ask Mr. Boudreau if he owned any firearms at that time on October 2nd?
I believe so.
And do you remember what his answer was?
I don't believe he had any firearms in his possession that were his.
And you said the house was cleared. Did someone go through the house and cleared the house?
I knew this from officers telling me, and then again, I had to watch all the body-worn camera footage for media release and redaction purposes, so I learned the officers did clear the house prior to detective arrival.
And they went through the garage as well?
Yes,
And when you came up on the scene, was the garage open or closed?
the garage was open.
And do you know about what time you had arrived there?
Approximately 10:30, the call was made at approximately 9:13 in the morning, and detectives arrived approximately 10:30 a.m.
And when do you think that you left? When you initially left, did you leave your car there because you drove the Tesla? Is that correct?
When I left the scene, once we took the Tesla to the property building, Yes, my assigned vehicle was left there secured. And then, again, a detective followed me to the property and evidence building where we met with property technicians upon arrival.
In your interview with Melanie, she provided you with some information and then called you back, you said, around October 14th? Is that correct?
Yes.
And at that time, did you just refer her to an attorney?
I listened to her grievances, and then her concern was primarily about the custody of their children. And I referred her to speak with an attorney regarding custodial issues.
Because it's not something that you really give advice about, right? Like as the detective.
That's not my expertise, but I do encourage people to speak with attorneys who specialize in family matters.
But she came to you because were you aware that
I'm going to
Brandon had not returned the children to her?
Sustained as relevance.
About how long was that conversation that you had with Melanie around the 14th?
10 minutes?
Was that on the phone or in person?
It was by phone.
So she was seeking help, but you really didn't have any for her, is that correct?
Again, to relevance.
Sustained.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
All right. Redirect.
Yes. Before we start. During your investigation, and through testimony you heard here, did we have a witness, Robert Abitamarco, that just said the Jeep was dark colored?
Yes,
No specifics of what color that was, just dark.
correct.
And then we've heard Brandon thought that the vehicle was some sort of camo or green color.
Yes,
And then eventually, we also learned that through statements made by Brandon Boudreau to both Officer Rob and yourself, that he believed this case was tied to an incident in Chandler. Did you learn that Lori Valllow, in fact, had a dark-colored Jeep?
yes,
And when you were able to obtain those photographs, did you learn that the Jeep was then gray?
yes,
You were asked about a probable cause statement that you wrote on November 19th of 2019. Do you recall that?
yes,
Was that after you learned about the gray vehicle, the gray Jeep that Lori Valllow had on July 11th of 2019 in Chandler, Arizona at that incident?
Yes.
And in that probable cause statement, do you just in fact say that it was a dark colored or gray colored Jeep?
Yes.
You don't actually say that a specific neighbor said that or where that information came from?
Correct. I was working with multiple detectives.
So you're using all of the different information that you gleaned, which included the fact that this defendant owned a gray Jeep Wrangler with Texas license plates, and that was put into your statement?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, you were asked a lot about the measurements of the Tesla and trajectory. Did Brandon Boudreau stop at the time of the shooting and put down a little ticky-tack marker and say, better note this for later so I can tell the detectives exactly where my vehicle was when I was shot?
No, he did not.
Did Brandon Boudreau get out of his car and go over and mark the exact end of the Jeep so that you would know exactly where that was when he was shot?
No, he did not.
Did he go over and tell the person, whoa, I gotta wait and find out exactly how this rifle barrel is sticking out of the back of your Jeep so that later on, they'll be able to document the height, the angle, if it's up, if it's down, if it's a little to the right or left, so that later on they'll be able to do some trajectory?
No,
So none of that happened.
none of that happened.
Were you surprised he didn't do that?
Not at all.
So you did receive information from another neighbor that they saw the Jeep in the approximate same location of where Brandon Boudreau saw it,
Yes.
parked there idling, running,
Yes.
same direction as Brandon gave,
Yes.
the same Texas plate as Brandon gave,
Yes.
and same dark tint as Brandon said.
Yes.
So when you talk about this only being Brandon, that's not accurate, right?
Correct.
In fact, Robert Abitamarco said he didn't even know Brandon because he just moved in, right?
Correct.
And so ultimately, when we're talking about trajectory, without knowing all of those specifics, were you aware of any way to recreate how the rifle was held, what angle it was at when it fired that shot into the Tesla, not knowing where the Tesla exactly was either?
No. Unable to determine that.
You were asked about the glass as well. When you package items, you put them in a box, a bag, a plastic bag, something like that, right? Depending on the piece of evidence you're collecting.
Yes.
Did you have any way to keep that glass from never disintegrating anymore so that it wouldn't change from the way it looked on October 2nd if you impounded it?
No, with shattered glass, it would continue to shatter. We have no way to package it to stay in its form when it's already broken.
So when you're talking about impounding that item or just throwing it away, if you put it in a box and you travel it to impound and then somebody throws it up into wherever it goes, could you say if you pulled it back out 5 years later that it looked exactly like it did that day when it fell onto the ground?
Absolutely not.
So is that why photographs were taken there?
Photographs, yes.
You were asked a lot about the interview of Brandon. During that audio recording, have you listened to that?
I have.
You told us you were in your vehicle, right?
That's correct.
And was your AC blowing very hard?
It was a warm day out, so yes, we were both. I was sitting in the driver's seat, he was in the passenger, and the vehicle was on with AC running.
Did Brandon talk soft at times?
Yes.
In listening to the recording, is it often difficult to hear what he's saying?
Yes.
And would you agree that the best evidence would be the actual recording versus someone's interpretation of what they believe he was saying?
Yes.
When you were considering the evidence at the scene, in addition to Robert Abotamarco, when you looked at that ring camera footage that we saw in court from Lynette Mendoza, did the black vehicle that you see appear to be consistent with a Tesla?
Yes.
Was it driving in the general direction of or towards Brandon Boudreau's home on that video?
Yes.
And was there a timestamp showing when you heard that loud bang after that vehicle went by?
Yes.
When was that?
It was at 9:13 and some seconds.
And was the 911 call made by Brandon around 9:14?
Yes.
So was that another piece of evidence that was considered by you in corroborating what Brandon had told you and what Robert Abotamarco had seen and what the physical evidence told you?
Yes.
When you were looking at the Tesla itself, you advised us that you have seen bullet holes into vehicles previously,
Yes.
and you have seen fragments of projectiles previously.
Yes.
When you looked at that bullet hole and those fragments, did you have any question as to whether or not that Tesla had been shot?
No question at all.
Did you ever recover a gun that you knew was used in this?
No.
Would the fact that it was one type of rifle over a different type of rifle change the fact that Brandon Boudreau's vehicle was shot that day?
No.
Could a handgun kill someone?
Yes.
Could a rifle kill someone?
Yes.
You were asked yesterday about LPR, license plate reader. Do you recall that?
I do recall that.
And we had heard from Tom Miller about the DEA license plate readers.
That's correct.
Is that the only license plate readers that exist?
No.
In this investigation, well, the defendant had asked you about there being no other license plate readers showing this Jeep. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate.
Was there a LPR hit for the Jeep Wrangler Texas plate LWD 0997 in a city south of Rexburg, Idaho on September 30th of 2019 at about 8:10 p.m.?
Yes.
Was there an LPR hit in Idaho for the Jeep Wrangler license plate LWD 0997 on US Highway 20 near Rexburg, Idaho at 3:54 and 4:28 a.m. on October 3rd?
Yes.
Would that again be consistent with other evidence that you learned in this case from other individuals?
Yes.
You were asked a bit about a cast report done by Nick Balance. Do you recall that?
I do.
Did you create that?
I did not create that report.
Did you provide some of the cell phone records that we admitted and talked about that you obtained through search warrants to Mr. Balance?
Yes.
And did information that he gleaned from that and that he made into that report that you reviewed appear consistent again with a timeline of that Jeep leaving Idaho on the 30th of September and being down in Arizona on October 2nd of 2019?
Yes, it did.
You were asked about a lot of different emails and information that you had with interactions that you had with Brandon Boudreau. Do you recall that?
I do recall that, yes.
And would it be fair to say, Detective, that at the time of February of 2020, you are investigating multiple cases?
Yes, that is accurate.
Would it be fair to say that in February of 2020, you are also investigating multiple cases with other agencies involving Melanie Boudreau?
Yes.
At the time of this shooting, we have discussed that this defendant and her brother, Alex Cox, were living in Rexburg, Idaho, correct?
Correct.
Were you then working with the Rexburg Police Department to help obtain information from Rexburg and other counties around there in relation to this investigation?
Yes.
So in any time when you were obtaining search warrants or continuing your investigation, were you pulling in information being provided to you from people such as the DEA LPR reader,
Yes.
Fremont County LPR readers,
Yes.
information being obtained by police up in Idaho
Yes.
from search warrants that they were executing,
Yes.
as well as search warrants that you executed up there on the Jeep?
Correct.
Was all of that put together when you were determining whether or not you had information to corroborate what Brandon Boudreaux told you on October 2nd of 2019?
Yes. It was a collective effort.
Although you are the case agent in this matter because it occurred in Gilbert, did you have to rely heavily on aid from the Rexburg Police Department and other agencies to obtain evidence in Idaho?
Yes.
And are those detectives in a better position to discuss things such as storage units or burner phones that were purchased up there?
Yes, they are.
Although you are familiar with those and they were all relevant to this investigation, would it be fair to say that since they obtained it, they're in the better position to testify as to it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I have no other questions for this witness.
Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? If so, please pass those down. I see at least one. Before I ask these, are there any other juror questions? All right. In your experience, is it unusual for witnesses to confuse colors or not remember them accurately?
Yes. Do I answer this for you, Your Honor?
I'll let the parties follow up on that if they need to. The next question is, were the attempted phone calls to wife recorded during the in-car interview of Brandon on the day of the shooting? I guess, let's clarify, did you record those phone calls?
To the second question, yes, those calls were recorded.
And were voicemails left explaining the situation?
A voicemail was left requesting a response for a call back, not explaining the situation. That was from Brandon. And then I know I later called and left a message explaining my involvement as a detective who wanted to talk to Melanie Boudreau at the time. And she later responded, and the interview happened the next day.
All right. Follow up on that question from the defense, on those 3 questions from the defense?
No, Your Honor.
From the state?
In terms of colors and not remembering them accurately, you said it's not unusual for a witness to not remember always a color. Is that due to just sort of the circumstances surrounding what's happening when they're trying to observe these things like a vehicle?
Yeah, so I'll answer this in a couple parts. It is not uncommon for people to commonly mistake black for white or red for blue or different colors, assuming they're not colorblind to begin with. You amplify that situation, for lack of better words, in a traumatic situation, going out to multiple violent scenes, or even not a violent scene, just an emotional scene, maybe between a domestic dispute. It is quite common that colors for vehicles or clothing or hairstyles or hair color are mistaken, especially when you add the traumatic element to it. So.
No other questions?
All right, you can step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
State can call its next witness.
Thank you.
Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, have a seat up here to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Vanessa Milkey. I'm a Forensic Scientist 3 for the City of Mesa Forensic Services.
How long have you worked there?
I have been there for over 12 years now.
And can you tell us your training and experience to work both as a forensic scientist and then, I guess, let's start there.
Okay. I have a bachelor's degree in biological sciences from Arizona State University. While in college, I was a forensic services intern for about 8 months for the City of Mesa Forensic Services. After college, I was a laboratory technician for United Blood Services for 1 year. Prior to my current position, I was a crime scene technician for the Chandler Police Department for almost 2 years. After I was a crime scene technician and I was hired at the City of Mesa, I completed the required serology and DNA training that took about 2 years.
All right, so what is your current role? What do you specifically do?
I examine items for the presence of biological fluids, conduct DNA analysis, prepare samples for DNA analysis, take notes, write reports, and review reports.
So you talked about training specifically at the City of Mesa with regards to DNA testing and analysis. How long of a process is that?
It took me about 2 years to complete all of the required training, and then every single year I'm required to do a minimum of 8 hours of continuing education.
And are there any type of quality assurance processes to ensure that your analysis is correct and your conclusions are accurate?
Yes, during training, I was required to complete competency tests along the way for each new thing that I learned. And then every single year, I have to do 2 proficiency tests to show that I'm proficient in serology and DNA analysis.
Now, at the Mesa Police Department, do you separate sort of this process and have one person take cuttings of swabs or evidence to prepare them for testing, and then another person who will take those to develop those unknown profiles for analysis?
Yes, we have serology and DNA. So there are some analysts that just do serology, and there's some that are trained in both serology and DNA analysis. For a particular case, it could be the same individual doing serology and DNA, or it could be different analysts.
So let's start with talking about DNA. What is it?
DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. It's considered the blueprint of life. You get half of your DNA from your mother and the other half from your father. Every individual has a different DNA profile with the exception of identical twins.
When the police are collecting biological evidence from a scene for DNA testing, are there different types of biological evidence that can be used for DNA testing?
Yes, a DNA profile can be generated from hair, semen, saliva, sweat, skin cells, blood.
So you talked about skin cells, and if we are talking about swabbing different areas that people touch, if a person touches an item, do they always leave behind DNA?
No, not always. It depends on the type of surface. If an individual is wearing gloves, they're not going to leave behind their DNA.
Does the environment also impact potentially your ability to obtain DNA from a swabbed surface that someone touched?
Yes, there are different environmental conditions such as heat, moisture, sunlight that can all damage the DNA. And also if there's any type of cleaning products that have been applied, such as bleach.
So just because a person touches an item doesn't mean you're going to be able to find the DNA there.
That's correct.
And then we've been talking about sort of a DNA profile. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, a DNA profile is kind of like a graph. There's different locations that I'm looking at that I am comparing from, let's say, a question sample to a known sample. So a known sample is something where I know where the sample was collected from. A typical known sample is buccal swabs, which cells are the cells from the inside of your cheek. So I have an expected DNA profile. And an unknown profile would be something from a crime scene where I don't know what the DNA profile is, but I'm going to look at all 23 different locations and I'm going to compare that to my known samples.
So when you're creating a DNA profile, do law enforcement agencies generally look at the same locations on the DNA, long strand of DNA?
Yes, different laboratories use different what's called kits, but it's all very similar locations.
You're not looking at every spot on the DNA chromosome, right?
No, just 23 different locations.
When you are looking at a DNA profile from a known source let's start with a known source, are you able to generally create a single source DNA profile?
From a known sample?
Yeah.
Yes, typically I am able to generate a full DNA profile from a known sample.
Okay. And like someone's blood would be a known sample?
Yes.
Now, if you have a cutting or a swab from a crime scene, are there different things that might affect your ability to develop a full DNA profile?
Yes, sometimes there's not enough DNA present for me to have a conclusive DNA profile, or sometimes there's too much DNA there where it's too complex, where I can't pull anything out or make any comparisons or conclusions.
Is one of the things we're talking about when we say there's too much DNA referred to often as a mixture?
A mixture is anything that's more than one individual contributing to that DNA sample.
And if you have a mixture, are you always able to tell us all the people who are part of that?
No, sometimes there's just too much information there where I can't separate out the different numbers and determine how many people are contributing to the sample.
When you develop a DNA profile from a swab from a crime scene, and there's a mixture of people who have contributed to that, do you ever have anything called a major contributor? What is that?
Yes, a major contributor is just the individual that's contributing the majority of the DNA to the sample.
And if you have a mixture, you told us you're not always able to tell all the people. Are you always able to tell us how many people contributed?
No, I don't always know how many people contributed, but we usually give a minimum number that the analyst would think is contributing to that mixture.
Okay. So if we see there's a major contributor, is there such a thing as a minor contributor?
Yes, the opposite of the major would be the minor. So if there's a major component, there's also a minor component. And with every sample, the minor component may not be conclusive.
Okay. When you are creating these DNA profiles of these unknown sources, are you able to tell sometimes if there's a male or female contributor?
Yes, there's a sex-determining marker called amylogenin. So a female would have an X and an X, and a male would have an X and a Y. If I'm looking at that sex-determining marker, if I see an X and a Y, then that is an indication that the profile is from a male. If there's a really big X and a really small Y, that would be an indication that there's a female present and there is also a male present. Because if there's just one male or two males, I would expect the X and the Y to be about the same height.
So when you are provided with a known sample of someone and some questioned sample that was taken from a crime scene, what are you asked to do with that? What does the analysis involve?
The DNA process is a 4-step process. The first step is called extraction, where the cells are broken open and the DNA is released from the cell. The second step is quantitation, where I'm determining how much DNA I have in a sample, if any at all. The third step is amplification. It's kind of similar to a DNA Xeroxing machine, where I'm making millions of copies of the DNA. And the last step is called detection, where I'm generating a DNA profile. The DNA profile from the unknown profiles can be compared to the DNA profile from the known individuals to determine if there's a match or no match.
Okay. So in January of 2020, was the Mesa Police Department lab doing DNA testing for the Gilbert Police Department?
Yes, and we still do.
And so was the process for the Gilbert Police Department to send over any known and any questioned DNA samples to you to see if you could develop DNA profiles and reach any conclusions?
Yes.
In this case, were you provided with several cuttings from Lisa Perry from swabs from a vehicle?
Yes, I was.
And were you provided with a DNA profile for an Alexander Cox that was developed by Emilyn Sapinosa?
After I completed analysis of my samples, I compared the results from my samples to any known individuals that were also submitted for the same case.
And was that for the Alexander Cox?
Correct.
Were you then asked to develop DNA profiles from those cuttings that Lisa Perry had given to you?
Yes.
And then compare those to Alexander Cox?
Correct.
Were you provided a cutting of a swab from the steering wheel of the Jeep?
Yes.
Were you able to create a DNA profile from that?
May I refer to my report?
If that would help refresh your recollection.
Go ahead.
Yeah, do you have that with you?
I do, I can.
Or do you need a copy?
Is it okay if I was writing?
Yeah,
it?
go ahead.
Yes, I was able to generate a DNA profile for this sample.
From the steering wheel?
Yes.
Were you able to determine how many contributors were in, well, let me ask you, was that a mixture?
It was a mixture. I have a major conclusive profile and the minor portion is inconclusive.
Okay. And for the minor, were you able to determine how many, I guess, contributors were in that mixture?
I have a minimum of 3 contributors.
Okay. Were you able to tell anything about the sex of the major contributor?
The major contributor is of male origin.
And were you able to tell anything about the sex of the minor contributors?
Since it's inconclusive, I didn't make any comparisons, or I didn't make any conclusions for the minor component.
Did you compare that major contributor DNA profile from the swab of the steering wheel to the known DNA profile of Alex Cox?
Yes, the major profile obtained from this item matches the DNA profile from Alexander Cox.
Do you have any statistics as to the frequency of that occurrence?
Yes.
Could you tell us those?
May I read from my report?
Go ahead.
The frequency of occurrence of an unrelated individual in a random population having the same genetic profile as the major DNA profile obtained from this item is approximately 1 in 975 sextillion African Americans, 1 in 111 quintillion Caucasians, and 1 in 344 quintillion Southwestern Hispanics.
What is a quintillion?
A quintillion is a 1 followed by 18 zeros.
Were you provided with additional other swab cuttings to also attempt to develop DNA profiles?
Yes.
Were you provided with a cutting from the passenger seat belt buckle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
No, this profile was inconclusive due to an insufficient amount of DNA.
What does that mean?
It means that I didn't have enough information to conclusively give any results that are reliable.
So it doesn't mean there's no DNA there.
Correct.
Just means you didn't get enough DNA to do any type of comparison.
Yes.
Okay. Were you provided with a cutting from Lisa Perry from the swab from the passenger interior door handle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile for that?
No, this was also an inconclusive DNA result.
Was there again insufficient DNA?
Yes.
Were you provided with swabs from the lug nuts from the spare tire of that Jeep vehicle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
No, this DNA profile was inconclusive due to an insufficient amount of DNA.
So again, there's DNA there, correct?
Correct.
But just not enough of it for you to do any comparisons.
Yes.
Were you provided with a cutting of the swab from the gear shift of that Jeep?
Yes.
And were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes, this is a DNA mixture that indicates that there's at least 3 individuals of male and female origin.
Did you have a major contributor to that DNA profile?
I did not.
Were you able to make any determinations as to sex of any of those contributors?
Yes, I made a determination that Alexander Cox cannot be eliminated as a contributor to the DNA mixture.
What does that mean?
That means that when looking at the DNA profile that I generated from the gear shifter, the different numbers that I have on my DNA profile for the gear shifter, the numbers that Alexander Cox has on his DNA profile, he cannot be eliminated from my conclusive locations. So for example, if he has, let's say, a 7 and an 8 at one location, the DNA profile that I generated from the gear shifter also has those same numbers. So there's not a difference in the profile from the gear shifter and the profile from Alexander Cox.
Now, so for the gear shift, you can't eliminate him because there's no inconsistencies in those profiles. There's just not enough information for you to make that conclusion?
Yes, there's no inconsistencies between the two.
Thank you. Were you provided with cuttings from the swab from Lisa Perry from the driver's side seatbelt buckle?
Yes.
Were you able to develop a DNA profile from that?
Yes, the major DNA profile from this item matches the DNA profile from Alexander Cox.
So is that a mixture then?
It is a mixture. The minor is inconclusive and the major is conclusive.
So the major was the DNA profile that you compared then to Alex Cox?
The major profile that I obtained matches Alexander Cox, correct?
And did you have statistics for the frequency of occurrence for this match from the driver's side seat belt buckle when you compared that DNA profile to Alexander Cox?
Yes. The frequency of occurrence of an unrelated individual in a random population having the same genetic profile as the major DNA profile obtained from this item is approximately 1 in 123 nonillion African Americans, 1 in 715 septillion Caucasians, and 1 in 2.78 octillion Southwestern Hispanics.
Septillion. I think that's a different number. What is that?
Septillion is a 1 followed by 24 zeros.
So a higher frequency even than the other match.
Yes.
So in this case, 2 of the swabs that you tested, both the steering wheel itself and the driver's side seat belt buckle, had major contributors where the DNA profile from those 2 items matched the DNA profile of Alexander Cox.
Yes.
Did that conclude your involvement in comparing these swabs to the known sample of Alexander Cox?
It did.
Thank you. The state has no other questions.
Cross?
No questions, Your Honor.
Any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I don't see any. All right, thank you. You can step down.
Thank you.
All right, let's recess for lunch. Can we resume at 1:15, everyone?
Yes.
Okay. We'll resume at 1:15. Please remember the admonition.
All rise for the jury.
Kyle Mueller. Kyle Mueller?
You want to get
Yeah,
them
I can go
ready?
get it.
All right, we'll bring the jury in.
All rise for the jury.
All right, please be seated. The jury is present. We're back on the record. The state can call its next witness.
Second pass. State calls Kyle Mueller.
All right, sir, come on up. Just stand in front of my clerk here and be sworn in.
Can you please spell your first and last name? Raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God.
All right, you're going to go up this ramp. Have a seat to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Sure. My name is Kyle Mueller. I'm a forensic scientist section supervisor with the City of Phoenix Police Department Crime Lab
How long have you worked for the City of Phoenix Crime Lab?
for about 24 years now.
And can you tell us the different duties you have done over those 24 years?
Sure. I started out in the controlled substances section where I analyzed illicit drugs for the presence or absence of an illicit drug. I then transferred to the trace evidence section in 2007 and was a forensic scientist 2, and then a forensic scientist 3, and then a 4, and then now I'm the supervisor. In the trace evidence section, I analyze gunshot residue kits, footwear and tire track impression evidence, fibers, tape, and miscellaneous unknowns.
Can you tell us the education and training you've had in the area of trace evidence specific to GSR, gunshot residue?
Sure. Well, to start, I have a bachelor's of science in biochemistry. That's from the University of Arizona. I also have a master's of science in forensic science from the University of Florida. I've been trained by senior members of the crime lab, but I've also received several training opportunities for trace evidence, whether it's internal or external where possible. Specifically towards gunshot residue, there's a lot of history in the scientific literature for reading about what GSR is and how it's created. It's also a matter of going through the specific training program with the Phoenix PD Crime Lab. So I went through that, and I'm also proficiency tested on a yearly basis.
Can you tell us how long was that training at the City of Phoenix to work in the trace area?
Well, the training is ongoing, but so each subdiscipline in trace evidence, you need to go through the training program and then become competent in that subdiscipline. So, and for specifically, excuse me, for gunshot residue, it was about 6 to 8 months.
And then you said you have ongoing proficiency training. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. Every year I receive a proficiency test to verify that I'm valid or competent in analyzing gunshot residue.
Well, let's start with then, what is gunshot residue?
Sure. Gunshot residue, or GSR for short, are small metallic particles that are formed from the discharge of a firearm. So when someone shoots a gun, these small particles are made up of the elements of lead, antimony, and barium that are from the primer paste inside the bottom of a cartridge casing. That primer paste essentially is disintegrated, and we're left with these GSR particles that escape from any part of the firearm that's not completely closed in the manufacturing process. There are effectively 3 classifications that we test for gunshot residue. There's characteristic particles that have all 3 elements of lead, antimony, and barium. There's also consistent particles that have 2 of the 3 of those, so lead and barium, or lead and antimony, or antimony and barium. There's also commonly associated particles, and those are just lead particles. So that plume of smoke that you see when you shoot a gun, a lot of that plume, if you will, are these small metallic particles.
When that plume lands on things, is it visible? Can I look over here and say, hey, there's a GSR particle?
No, these are very small. They're anywhere from 5, 10, maybe 5 or 15 microns in width. To give you an example, if you were to take a cross-section of a human hair, that's around 60 to 90 microns. So these are very small particles. You can't see them with the naked eye. We have a very high-powered microscope in the in the trace evidence section called an SEM, and that's what we use for our analysis.
So does it matter if someone fires a handgun or a rifle? Is it going to be the same particles you're looking for?
Those same particles are generated regardless of the caliber of firearm used or the ammunition used. We still look for those 3 elements within that same type of particle.
When someone discharges a gun, what factors might impact whether or not that GSR residue particles are left on a person or objects around the gun?
Well, you can imagine when someone shoots a gun, it's kind of like that plume of smoke that's generated. It's kind of like smoking a cigarette. That plume of smoke is going to travel one way or the other based on if you're outside, if you're inside, if you're and it's a windy day, or if it's raining. So if you're in an enclosed space, depending on where the wind velocity is, it's going to depend on where that travels.
So if a person fires a gun from inside a vehicle while it's parked, would you in general expect to find GSR particles inside that vehicle?
Yes, it's certainly possible.
Okay. Can GSR particles over time get lost or removed from whatever object they have attached to after the gun is discharged?
So these particles, like I said before, they're like a fine metallic dust. They don't have a half-life. They don't decay over time. They don't evaporate. They're simply just washed away. So if GSR particles are found on an object, they will stay there indefinitely until they're washed away.
Okay. Have you seen cases where GSR was found inside a vehicle weeks or months after someone has fired a gun inside that car?
It's possible, yes.
In a case where it's alleged that a person was inside a rear portion of a Jeep and fired a rifle out the back window, would it be within the normal scope of possibilities to locate GSR on the windows of that vehicle a month after the shooting?
It's possible, yes.
Would it be impacted if, say, someone went in the Jeep and sprayed some Windex and cleaned off all the windows? Would that then remove it?
Yes, it would possibly remove any GSR.
So when we're talking about collection of an item that's not immediately after the discharge, does the fact of someone cleaning or not cleaning the area around the discharge impact the potential to collect those particles?
Yes, it would potentially remove those particles.
Can you tell us, in general, what you are provided with and then how you look for GSR particles with the kit you are given?
Sure. Depending on the case, a general GSR kit has vials inside of that kit. They're labeled usually about where they are collected from. There's essentially a plastic vial, and when you open up, when you open up the cap to that plastic vial, on the inside of that cap is a small aluminum stub that has effectively sticky tape on it. And that tape is used to sample an area. The portion being, or the idea behind that is that if you have GSR on an area, whether it's someone's hands or an inanimate object, you would then stub that sample, and then any GSR on that sample will then be transferred to that stub. Now, those GSR stubs are then introduced as evidence into the laboratory, and that's where I come in and I test that evidence. So the GSR vials and those stubs are essentially, they come in a GSR kit that's labeled depending on the evidence, and then start my note-taking process regarding what the GSR labels say, where they're taken from, and then I essentially take those stubs out of those vials and place them in an instrument called an SEM EDS. And that essentially stands for Scanning Electron Microscopy with Energy Dispersive X-ray Spectroscopy. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm introducing those stubs into that SEM because it's a very high power microscope to view these very small particles. I then analyze the kit with a program that we have for looking for GSR particles. The program then generates a report of what it found, and then I go back typically the next day and try to determine if these were actual GSR particles that were detected by the instrument or whether they were not. And then I compile my report with my results.
You told us earlier that there are 3 different elements you are looking for. What is the significance of locating 1, 2 of them together, or all 3 of those elements together in one particle?
So one particle that has all 3 elements is called characteristic, meaning that is unlikely to have come from any other source in the environment other than from the discharge of a firearm. 2 of those, so a consistent particle is 2 of those elements, so lead and antimony, or lead and barium, or antimony and barium. And those are consistent particles, meaning that while they're also associated with the discharge of a firearm, they're also found in the environment. Lead is a commonly associated with particle, and while it's found in the environment, it's also found in, again, GSR, this plume of smoke that we see when someone discharges a weapon.
So you told us you work for the Phoenix Police Department. Do you still, does your agency assist other agencies with processing GSR kits?
Yes, we do.
On January of 2020, were you provided with 2 GSR collection kits from the Gilbert Police Department?
Yes, I was.
And were those marked with the Gilbert property identification numbers of 645-886 and 645-888?
Yes.
Were you asked to analyze these?
I was.
When you receive those, do you note whether or not they are integrity seals have been kept there and that they are still properly sealed when they arrive to you?
Yes, I do.
And were they still properly sealed with all integrity seals on them?
Yes, they were.
Now, the kits or the vials, do those come inside their own container, and then each vial itself is also individually sealed with the tag, I guess?
So the vials themselves that have the GSR stubs in them aren't individually sealed. They're usually anyway 3 to 4 of a pack, if you will, of vials, and then inside of that, or excuse me, those vials are then inside another envelope which is inside the GSR kit.
Do the vials, though, have their own, I guess you indicated label, tape, whatever we want to say, going around them indicating what each one is from?
Yes,
Okay. So in this case, when you received those two kits, each of the vials had their own tape with the labeling and then were packaged in sealed packaging.
yes, that's correct.
And when you were provided with these two items, these two kits, did you, can you tell us what your initial process was?
Sure. I received notification from the Gilbert Police Department of where exactly these GSR vials were collected, so I could get a better idea of what to test first. So I got that information, and then I started my analysis on one of the GSR kits. From 3 of the vials were from the inside of the Jeep, specifically the windows.
Why did you want to test the windows of the Jeep versus the tabs that may have been from, say, the back of the seats of the Jeep?
Well, testing the windows first I thought was pertinent because they're more likely to not come into contact with an item that would previously had GSR on it. You know, if GSR is on the inside of a window, unless it's been cleaned, it would probably be there still.
Okay. The GSR kit that you decided to test, did that contain stubs from the passenger side interior back window, the passenger side interior window, and the driver's side interior window?
Yes.
I assume you used the same process with the SEM microscope that you described?
Yes, that's correct.
And then you independently confirm whether or not what the microscope located is in fact the items it indicates?
Correct.
For this one, starting with the passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles in that collection kit commonly associated with GSR?
Yes.
And so again, so we understand for commonly associated, what does that mean?
That means those are lead particles.
Okay, so just the single individual lead particles, and you found those on that stub.
Correct.
So for that same passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles consistent with GSR?
Yes, I did.
And again, just so we understand, what does consistent with GSR mean?
That means 2 of the 3 elements from a characteristic particle are present.
And do you in fact even note how many of those particles you find?
Yes, I do.
When you are looking for those, do you count every single one on the entire stub? Or do you at some point say that's enough to show they're there?
After 10, essentially, I stop. So if it's anything less than 10, I count and put that in my notes.
All right. When you were looking at this passenger side interior back window, did you find any particles that were characteristic of GSR?
Yes, I did.
And again, what does characteristic mean?
That means it has one particle that has the elements of lead, antimony, and barium that is kind of a round or amorphous morphology that is characteristic of being from the discharge of a firearm.
Okay. So when you located the commonly associated consistent with and characteristic particles, what was your conclusion as to the kit that was used to collect from the passenger side interior back window?
Again, that area of the Jeep is consistent with being in the vicinity of a discharged firearm or even coming into contact with something that had GSR on it.
Okay. Was one of the other vials that we discussed from the passenger interior window?
Yes.
Did you find any particles commonly associated with GSR on that stub?
Yes, I did.
How about consistent with or characteristic of?
No, I did not.
So what was your conclusion as to that vial where you just had particles commonly associated with GSR?
So to back up, when I put together my report, I took the results from all 3 samples that I tested, and made my conclusion on that. If I'm looking at individual vials, so the vial that we just spoke about that had just the commonly associated with, that means that, again, a discharged weapon could have occurred within the vicinity of that sample being taken, but it could also come from an environmental source as well. But that's just for that one sample.
In a vehicle where a gun is discharged and the samples aren't collected till about a month later, why is it important to look at multiple locations?
Well, so when a gun is discharged and you think of that plume of smoke, that those GSR particles are going to travel anywhere potentially in the inside of that vehicle. So any of those areas could potentially have GSR on them. So when I when I performed my analysis on those samples, really finding where they are specifically in the Jeep isn't really an indication that something happened. It was just finding any in the Jeep. So it doesn't really matter where they originated or where I found them. It's just that they were present.
Okay, so you're really just looking to see, are those characteristic particles present within this Jeep that would indicate that a gun may have been discharged within that vehicle?
That is correct.
So we talked about 2 of the 3 vials. Was the third vial the driver's side interior window?
Yes.
Did you find particles commonly associated with GSR on that vial from the driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
Did you find particles consistent with GSR on that driver's side interior window?
Yes.
And did you find particles characteristic of GSR on that driver's side passenger or driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
When you then were looking at all 3 of those in different areas within that Jeep, were you then able to reach an overall conclusion as to this vehicle where these kits were taken from?
Yes, I was.
What was your conclusion?
That the inside of the vehicle was, again, in the vicinity of a firearm when it was discharged or came into contact with an item that had GSR on it.
And then given the locations of the collection sites, that was done to try to look for places where potentially the areas may not have been washed?
Correct.
And when you were talking about something coming into contact with those locations, are you also thinking about the fact that if someone puts a gun in their car, it's not usually on a window?
Correct. I wouldn't test like the back seat of a vehicle knowing that someone used that vehicle to go hunting or go to a shooting range in case they put their firearm in the back of their vehicle.
So if the collection had only been, for instance, of the seats of the vehicles, that may have been less, that may have played into your conclusion some?
My first initial analysis, yes.
In this case, because you were looking at windows in this vehicle, were those stubs specifically chosen by you because they were the windows that were collected?
Yes.
I have no other questions for this witness.
All right, Cross.
Just a few questions. Mr. Mueller, you had said that a gun may have been discharged in this vehicle. Is that your conclusion?
Yes.
Okay. And just so I understand, because I'm trying to wrap my head around that, the 3 particles altogether, right?
Yes.
Antimony, barium, and lead, all 3 make it actually GSR. Is that correct?
So there's 3 classifications. All 3 of those elements in one particle is considered a characteristic particle, which is considered a GSR particle. But there's also the 2 component and the 1 component particles that I detected are also considered GSR.
Right. And so in your report, you say they're also found from a number of relatively common non-firearm sources. Is that also correct?
It's possible, yes.
And what are the non-firearm sources? Could you tell me some of those?
Sure. For lead, lead used to be prominent in gasoline and paint years ago. Lead can still be used in solder or varying manufacturing facilities. The two component particles are less common, but they also can be found in maybe some cosmetics or fireworks. But again, those are less common.
Okay. So would you find an actual GSR where all three elements were together in fireworks? Like if a firework went off in the vicinity?
No, ma'am.
You would never find GSR after fireworks?
Three component particle, no.
So you would find either consistent or commonly associated?
It's possible depending on the firework.
Okay. What about from brake dust?
Again, that's possible, yes.
What about from fertilizer?
I'm not familiar with fertilizer having those specific elements.
What about hairspray?
I'm not familiar with hairspray being a component or having those components.
Okay. So of the kits that you took, of the stubs that you had that you actually tested, how many all three particles did you find together, grouped together?
So two, one on the driver's side and one on the passenger side on the inside windows.
So just two?
Correct.
And so if a firearm were to be shot in the back of the Jeep, would you expect to find more than two from all the stubs that you analyzed?
It's difficult to determine how many particles are actually there. I'm essentially getting a sample of that area. So the number is not really pertinent to my analysis.
So is it safe to say that whoever was the person who got the stubs would be deciding what you would end up analyzing later? You wouldn't have any control over that, right?
Correct. I didn't collect the stubs.
Okay. So out of the two that you found, out of how many stubs did you actually analyze? I'm sorry, I missed that.
So I analyzed three. In total, there were 8 collected.
Okay. That's all, Your Honor.
Redirect.
Just briefly. For the characteristic particles with all three elements, did you find one of those in the passenger side interior back window?
Yes.
And did you find 2 of those characteristic particles in the driver's side interior window?
Yes, I did.
You were asked about some different things like hairspray and brake dust. Are those things that would create the 3-particle characteristic items that we're talking about that are characteristic of GSR?
No, they would not.
So no matter how much hairspray we use in the car, you're not going to get antimony, barium, and lead stuck together into a particle?
No.
No matter how many fireworks we blow off in the back of this Jeep, we're not going to get the antimony, the barium, and the lead together as a characteristic particle?
No, ma'am.
So is this why it doesn't really matter how many you find? The fact that it's there is what's important?
Correct.
Because when you find the particles that have all 3 of those, that is what's the most meaningful of all of this.
Yes.
And that's because for the single, just lead, we could come up with some reason why that might be there, right?
Correct.
And for even the consistent with, maybe you can come up with some reasons why it's there.
Correct.
But when we start talking about those characteristic particles, that means it's gunshot residue.
Correct. And the reason why I list out the other 2 classes, if you will, the consistent and commonly associated with, is because I expect to see all 3 types in the discharge of a firearm.
So when we are looking for the discharge of a firearm in a, we'll call it vehicle, as we were talking about here, you wouldn't expect to only find the characteristic particles.
No, I would not.
You would expect to find the single particles, the two combination, and all three together.
That's correct.
Exactly what you found here.
Correct.
I have no other questions.
Are there any questions for this witness from any member of the jury? I don't see any, sir. You can step down.
Thank you.
State can call its next witness.
Thank you.
All right, sir, come on up. You're going to stand right here in front of my clerk, be sworn in.
Can you please spell your first and last name? Do you swear that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
All right, you're going to walk around the court reporter. Have a seat to my left.
Would you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Ray Hermosillo. I'm employed with the Rexburg Police Department.
Where is Rexburg Police Department?
Rexburg is a little town in southeast Idaho.
How long have you worked for the Rexburg Police Department?
I've been with Rexburg since 2001.
And can you tell us your different jobs or duties over the years at that department?
Sure. I started in patrol in 2001 as a normal patrolman. I worked patrol for about 18 years before I was promoted to detective in 2019. During that 18 years, I was able to obtain numerous certificates. I currently hold a supervisor certificate and an advanced certificate through Post Academy. In 2019, I was promoted to detective. I currently am a lieutenant over the detective division.
So in 2019, you were working as a detective in Rexburg. How big is that city?
Rexburg is roughly probably 40,000.
Okay. How many detectives are there?
Currently, we have 7 detectives for the 40,000 people.
And back in 2019?
About the same, 7.
And did you cover sort of any investigations in every investigation as a detective in Rexburg?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to bring you to November 1st of 2019. Did you speak with a detective, Nolan McDermott, from the Gilbert Police Department here in Arizona?
I did.
Were you asked to aid the Gilbert Police Department by locating and impounding a 2018 Jeep Wrangler with a Texas license plate LWD 0997?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you provided with an address where that Jeep might be located?
I was.
Are you familiar with 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, Rock Creek townhomes.
Okay. So those are townhomes. Are there multiple units there?
Correct.
Were you provided with a unit 175 that would potentially be relevant to this case?
Yes, I was told that 175 was where I needed to focus. 175, 174.
When you were given this information, were you provided with a probable cause statement from Detective McDermott?
I was on November 1st of 2019.
And Knowing that you were going to be looking for this Jeep to seize it, did you obtain a search warrant?
Yes, I did.
So on November 1st, did you go out to 565 Pioneer Road, Unit
did.
175?
Yes, we did.
Did you go with someone else?
I'm sorry, could
Sure.
you repeat that?
Did you go with someone else or were you by yourself?
No, I went with other detectives.
And what did you do when you got out there?
We were asked by Gilbert Police to perform intermittent surveillance to see if we can locate the 2018 Jeep Wrangler. So that's exactly what we did. We went out, performed surveillance, and we were unable to locate the Jeep on November 1st.
Now, had you been provided with the name Laurie Valllow?
Yes.
Had you been provided with the name Alexander Cox?
Yes, we have.
Were you looking for the Jeep that belonged to Laurie Valllow?
Correct.
Okay. When you were doing surveillance of Unit 175, did you take any photos of the individuals who you saw going into and out of that residence?
We did. We took a couple photos of some individuals coming out of the garage and going into the garage area of 175.
Did you see that person go into any vehicles?
We did.
Was that a male or female you saw?
That was a female, Lori Valllow.
Do you see that person that you saw going in and out of Unit 175 and getting in and out of the vehicle that you saw in Rexburg, Idaho on November 1st in the courtroom today?
Yes, I do.
Can you point her out and tell us what she's wearing?
She is at the defendant's table in a blue coat with a light blue shirt and red glasses.
Your Honor, may the record reflect the witnesses identified the defendant.
Good show.
Did you, in fact, follow Ms. Valllow in a vehicle to another location and back to the Unit 175?
We did. We followed her to Walgreens in Rexburg off of Main Street, and then followed her back to her residence at 175.
What kind of vehicle was she driving at that time?
A blue Nissan Rogue.
Okay. I've shown defendant exhibits 126 and 127. If I may have my paralegal approach. And you said you took photos of those. I'm showing you 126 and 127. Can you let me know if you recognize those? Do you recognize those as photos taken from surveillance on November 1st of 2019?
Yes, ma'am.
State will move to admit 126 and 127.
Any objection?
Just relevance, Your Honor.
They're admitted. 126, 127.
Now, you told us that, if I can have the Elmo, that the defendant, Ms. Valllow, was driving a blue Nissan Rogue. Did that have an Arizona license plate of CRT 2994?
Yes, ma'am.
We're showing here exhibit 126. I'm going to pull out some. Although we can't really see well. When there's no glare, is Ms. Valllow going into the residence here?
That is correct. That's Miss Valllow.
And this is Unit 175.
Correct.
And then 127 is her going further into it, albeit the glare here, we can't really see that.
Yes, ma'am.
So did you find the Jeep that you were looking for, that 2018 Jeep with the Texas plates when you were there on November 1st?
No, we did not. Not on November 1st.
Did you search the whole complex?
We did.
So did you go back again later to try to locate the Jeep?
Yes, we looked for the Jeep. November 1st was a Friday in 2019. We looked for the Jeep all weekend and were unable to locate it. I was finally able to locate it Monday morning, November 4th.
So did you went back to look again on Monday morning to 565 Pioneer Road and you saw the Jeep?
I was on my way home from the gym and looked over to my right and saw the Jeep parked outside of apartment 175.
What did you do when you saw it?
I had Erickson Tow Company seize the Jeep and tow it to our impound lot.
Is that an internal or external lot?
We have both external and internal, but we towed it and put it inside our impound lot, inside.
Did you let the Gilbert Police Department know you had located and seized that Jeep?
Yes, ma'am, we did.
Did you attempt to contact Lori Valllow to let her know you took the Jeep?
We did several times that day. We made attempts to go over and knock on the door to let Miss Valllow know that we had her Jeep in case they wondered if it was stolen or impounded. And we were unable at any time to make contact with Miss Valllow, and nobody had called the police department stating their Jeep was missing either.
So you never received a call from Lori Valllow to report her Jeep stolen?
No,
Never got a call from Alex Cox saying the Jeep was stolen?
no.
So you have the Jeep on the 4th of November. Do you coordinate with the Gilbert Police Department for them to come to Rexburg, Idaho to be able to process the Jeep?
We did.
Did you in fact author the search warrant for them to be able to take things like DNA swabs and GSR kits and things like that?
Yes.
Were you present when that search warrant was executed on November 18th of 2019?
Yes, I was.
Were you just watching and allowing them to do the processing?
That's correct.
When you were there on November 18th, as well as when you impounded the Jeep, did you note anything about the tinting on the rear windows of that Jeep?
I noticed that the tinting on the Jeep was extremely dark. It appeared darker than Idaho state law allows.
From the outside, trying to look inside, were you able to see into the vehicle?
Not unless I got right up to the window.
Did you learn during this investigation that that Jeep had been taken to Dan Moss's tinting on September 25th to have those windows tinted?
I did learn that later on in the investigation, yes.
Okay. But at that time, you did not know that.
That's correct.
On December 18th of 2019 was a second search warrant executed on that Jeep Wrangler.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you author that search warrant as well?
I did.
And were you again present for the execution of that search warrant?
Yes, I was.
Were photographs taken of the Jeep?
Yes, they were.
Were photographs taken of receipts inside the Jeep?
Yes.
When the Jeep was being processed on December 18th and photographs were taken of the receipts, did you note a receipt inside that was related to or that came from Arizona?
Yes, I did.
Did you notice a receipt from Arizona that was from October 1st of 2019?
Yes, I did.
Understanding that you were being asked by the Gilbert Police to investigate a shooting on October 2nd, did you feel that was relevant?
Yes, ma'am.
Shown the defendant exhibits 128 through 134. If I can have my paralegal approach. On the rear windows of that Jeep.
I noticed that the tinting on the Jeep was extremely dark. It appeared darker than Idaho state law allows.
From the outside, trying to look inside, were you able to see into the vehicle? On November 26th.
It was also Lori's brother, Alex Cox, that was with Chad Daybell at that time.
Can you describe for us the circumstance you saw these two on November 26th? Where were they? Were they around a vehicle, around a townhome?
So when we made contact with Chad, and Alex, they were unloading Alex's pickup truck, unloading items from the back of it into the garage of apartment 175. And that's when I initially made contact with both of them.
You said that they were getting out of a vehicle. What kind of vehicle was it?
It was a gold Ford pickup truck.
Was it a Ford F-150?
Yes,
Do you recall if it had Arizona plates on it?
it did have Arizona plates. I believe
Were they, I guess, personalized plates?
they were personalized.
Was that a CPQUINT?
Yes, CP Quint.
At this time, when you are at this apartment complex on November 26th, is it your understanding that Lori Valllow is living at those Rock Creek townhomes?
That's correct.
And was it your understanding at that time that Alex Cox was living in the Rock Creek townhomes as well on November 26th?
At that time, yes, we knew he was at the Rock Creek townhomes.
I've shown the defendant exhibit 135. I could have my paralegal approach.
Thank you.
Is that just sort of an aerial overview of the Rock Creek apartments that we're talking about
Yes, it is.
at 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that show where Unit 175 is?
Does.
State will move to admit 135.
Any objection?
Just foundation, Your Honor.
135 is admitted.
Okay. So we see here this is Pioneer Road. Is this the Rock Creek townhomes?
Yes, it is.
Using Exhibit 135, are you able to tell us approximately where Unit 175 is located?
Is there a pointer I can use, or?
Could he point to the TV behind you?
Look behind.
If you could get up and,
Go ahead.
thank you. So if you could point to, yeah,
175, the back of 175 is roughly here, and the front door is this way. So the garage, where I first made contact with Alex and Chad both, we're right back here.
Detective, maybe if you could go to this side. Sorry, just the other side so the jury doesn't have to look through you. Thank you.
The Jeep was located on November 4th, parked in a stall right here.
So that's where you located it on the 4th, and that's right near the 175 you were describing?
Correct, right in front of the 175 garage.
Now, you told us that you also knew that at that time Alex Cox was living at the Rock Creek townhomes. Can you show us where that was, what unit that was, approximately?
107 is where Alex Cox was living, and it was roughly here, the front door to 107.
Okay. During this time on November 26th, did you learn that a Melanie Boudreau was also living at the Rock Creek townhomes?
Yes, I did.
What unit did she live in?
She lived in 174, which is right next door to Ms. Vallow's residence at 175.
Thank you. You can be seated now. Now, did you become, I guess, were documentation obtained along with an affidavit for the rental application for Lori Valllow to live at 565 Pioneer Road?
Yes, they were.
Did the documentation show her as renting unit 107?
Yes, it showed Lori Valllow as the renter of apartment 107.
Did you ever see her over at apartment 107?
No, I didn't.
So on November 1st, you saw her at 175?
That's correct.
Your Honor, the state will move to admit Exhibit 162, which is pursuant to 803 and 902 with the affidavit authenticating them from the custodian of records.
All right. Any objection?
No objection.
Can you give me the number again?
162.
162 submitted.
So 162, we see the application for Lori Valllow to rent 565 Pioneer Road, number 7. Is that correct?
Number 107, yes.
107. And that was submitted on August 14th?
Correct, the way I understand it.
And did that indicate a vehicle of a Jeep Wrangler with the LWD 0997?
Yes,
That's the Jeep that you impounded on the 4th?
that's correct.
And did it also indicate a Nissan Rogue blue, no license plate at that time?
Correct.
And is that the type of vehicle that you had seen Lori Valllow driving when you were doing surveillance? Now, you told us that Alex Cox also lived in this townhome complex. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you know what unit he rented in his paperwork? Was it 175?
Yes, Alex was a renter in apartment 175.
Now, we're talking about November 26, where you're doing some surveillance. You have interactions with Chad Daybell and with Alex Cox outside of Unit 175.
Correct.
Did you go to Unit 105 to see if Lori Valllow was there?
We went to unit 107,
107, yeah, I'm sorry.
see if Lori was there, and there was nobody there at that apartment.
Were you aware then that the rental paperwork for Alex Cox, along with an affidavit authenticating those records being kept in the normal course of business, was obtained from the Rooftop Real Estate Management Company for Alex Cox's rental of Unit 175?
Yes, we didn't obtain that on the 26th of November, but later throughout the investigation, yes, ma'am.
Correct. State will move to admit those pursuant to 803 and 902. Exhibit 160.
Any objection?
No objection.
160 is submitted.
And so, although this is a tough thing to read, do we see the 26th day of August of 2019, Alexander Cox?
Yes.
And does the letter from the Realty Management say that Alex Cox had rented 565 Pioneer at Unit 175?
That's correct.
Now, you told us that on the 26th of November, you had contact with Chad Daybell and Alex Cox near Unit 175. Did you go to Unit 175 to see if anyone was inside there?
We knocked on apartment 175. We also knocked on apartment 174, which is where Lori's niece lived, to see if maybe they were over there. And we were unable to make contact with anybody at all three apartments.
Okay. Now, the next day on November 27th, were search warrants executed on units 107 174, and 175.
Yes, they were.
Was anyone home in any three of these residents when they were executed?
No, there was not.
I'm going to talk about Unit 107, the one that was in the rental paperwork rented to Lori Valllow. Can you describe for us what you saw when you went into that unit?
Apartment 107 was completely vacant. It looked like everybody had moved out. There wasn't anything in the entire apartment, so we assumed that nobody had lived there because it was vacant.
So no furniture,
No, ma'am.
no groceries?
Nothing. Like it was ready to be moved in for a new tenant.
Okay. When you went into Unit 175, where you had seen Miss Valllow going into previously after making the trip to the Walgreens on November 1st, what did it look like inside that unit?
So 175 was different. There was furniture, food in the pantry, food in the refrigerator, beds. It looked like somebody was living there. But as we went upstairs into the master bedroom and other bedrooms, the entire closet was completely empty, other than just empty hangers. So it looked like somebody had just grabbed everything hanging. There were no clothes, and just took off with what they had.
Were photographs taken inside Unit 565 of 565 Pioneer Road, Unit 175 during that search warrant?
Yes, photos and also a video.
Okay. Did each of these units have their own garage as well?
They did.
So I'm going to start with the interior of that residence. When you were inside Unit 175, did you see any documentation in there relating to renting a storage unit for Lori Valllow?
Yes, we did. We found a rental agreement in the master bedroom on what I believe to be was a copier, where it detailed the address of the storage unit, self-storage plus, and also the storage unit number, which was C52.
I wonder if I've shown the defendant Exhibit 136 through 138, if my paralegal can approach.
All right, I am calling it. I'll be back on bright and early tomorrow, so maybe we'll do the part 2 and finish this one in the morning. All right, if you've been on with me live today, thank you so much for watching. We're gonna be counting down the days very, very soon for Monica Cementilli's sentencing and Donna Adelson. I'm very excited about this year and the different ones that we're gonna be watching. So anyway, thank you again for watching.